My name is Connie Rensink. I am the Director of Global Education and Outreach for iEARN-USA. And today's topic that we're going to be talking about is developing global competence through virtual exchange. Before we get started, I really want to stop and appreciate, first of all, of course, our coordinators and Lucy Gray for getting us started and reconvening us with the GLOW conference this year. But a special shout out to the partners that made this all possible. And as you can see, World Savvy and Meg were some of their premier partners, Global Nomads and Podico, CFR Taking It Global, CEBG, the CILLC, Fulbright, Digital Promise, and My Hero. And My Hero is one of our partners as well. And so really appreciate their sponsorship and support of this conference so that it could make it possible for everyone to join us for free. As you are learning throughout this session, we hope that you will share your thoughts and reflections with these hashtags, hashtag GlowEDU and hashtag GlobalEd22. I am on Twitter and would love to connect with you there. And I'll echo Lucy, as long as we're there and as long as it exists, hopefully it'll still be there. It has been a really rich resource for professional connections for me. Please note that this session is being recorded and all presentations and discussions are going to be preserved for a later asynchronous viewing by participants. So if you are interested in coming back to this content, you can also watch the recording later. So let's get started. And how I want to begin is letting you know that a little bit about our history at iEARN-USA and how we have come to be experts in the field on virtual exchange. iEARN was created 30 years ago, a little over 30 years ago, actually, in 1988. And that first exchange was between classes in the United States and classes in the Soviet Union, Russia. It was in the midst of the Cold War, and really the goal of that exchange was to prevent nuclear war and to really develop relationships and friendships of people to people so that there would be an understanding between them. So the fast forward now to 2022, and you can see we have 97 projects, 13 learning circles. All of them are aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals. Last year, we had over 2,700 teachers and 70,000 students connect in our SAFE Global Collaboration Center, which is a space where classes can connect to do global projects online. All of our projects are proposed and facilitated by classroom teachers so that it will fit their instance for their learning. Now, we would be remiss if we weren't to talk a little bit about global competence here. And you are probably familiar, if you were in the keynote this morning with Dana Mortensen, you heard her explain them very explicitly. This is the PISA graphic that talks about global competence, examining those local and global intercultural issues, understanding and appreciating perspectives, engaging in effective interactions, and then taking action. You can also see here that iEARN has adopted those, and we have our own 5 outcomes for global competence about connecting with that global community, the communication skills with diverse audiences, developing that openness and respect with different cultures and perspectives, taking that collaborative action, and we add that word collaborative in there. Within our projects, we encourage students to work with each other and classrooms to work with each other on the actions that they take. And then finally, developing a culture of caring for each other and the planet. And that's really building that empathy piece. All of iEARN projects also have to align with how will this project improve the quality of life on the planet. And in 2015, we went through and aligned all of our projects with the Sustainable Development Goals. Each of them hits that number 4, quality education, but we also have some other specific projects such as Girl Rising that hits gender equality, or Water is Life that touches on both climate action and life below water. We also have Earth Stewardship that looks at climate action and life on land. So each of our projects does align with one of the SDGs. But really what we're here to talk to today is a little bit about some of the virtual exchange practices that help build global competence and what that looks like as we prepare students for virtual exchange and also as we are in the middle of those virtual exchanges. So the first thing I want to talk about is preparing students for virtual exchange. And I am going to put in the chat here some resources for you to use. And so you can see that we have a class introduction letter. And in that exercise, students take the time to really think about what other students would want to know about them and think about the questions also that they would create about what they want to know about other people. But it really gives them a good exercise about being thoughtful about culture and perspectives. The buddy contract is actually an extension of setting guidelines and expectations activity that I'm going to outline in more detail here in just a second. But that is a space where students agree and sign a contract that they're going to work with a buddy student in their class to monitor each other and be accountable for being respectful, for making connections and thinking about how what they respond either in a written or verbal way, if it's through a video conference or if it's in a discussion board online, how are they going to monitor and be respectful and be good digital citizens in that situation. The setting guidelines and expectations activity, I'm going to walk through just a little bit here and a little more briefly. The first thing that you do in setting in guidelines and expectation activities is you reflect on your current community rules or class rules. And so if you have certain rules in your class, you talk with your class about why we have those rules, why is it important to follow rules, and creating those safe and respectful spaces. Next, you spend some time brainstorming guidelines for what that would look like online. And I'd like to invite you here to take a minute and type in the chat. What is something as we're online that we would want to set as a guideline? One example that I'm going to give you that we hear often is thinking about listening to learn and listening to hear versus listening to respond. And so that's something that students don't always think about. They want to quickly share their own stories or they want to share what they thought of immediately instead of asking another question and digging deeper into what they're having better understanding with the people that they're connecting with. So thinking about what those guidelines would be. And if you think of other guidelines, I invite you to add them in the chat as we talk about that. The next thing is to create a positive working agreement. And so in that positive working agreement, we're going to say this in a positive way. And so instead of saying, don't listen, don't immediately respond to someone else, you're going to actually frame it in a positive manner. And so that would be to listen, to understand, and contribute more feedback. Ask more questions. And so we're going to add positive working agreement statements as we go along. Then you're going to establish some rewards and consequences. Some of the rewards are just a better relationship with the people that we're connecting with in another classroom and in another space. They don't have to be tangible rewards, such as a sticker or a certificate, though that might be included. And consequences may not always be punitive. A consequence may be that you don't have a good relationship or that you get removed from that discussion thread and thinking about that. But also to post those class guidelines when you think about that so that students have those front and center as they're working in the collaboration space or in the exchange space. The next thing we're going to talk about is quality online discussions. Particularly when you're working in a global exchange environment, you may not be in the same time zones, and so you may not have the opportunity to connect through video conference. So you want to think a little bit about how we would post in a discussion board, and how we would respond in a discussion board. The first thing that we invite people to look at is the title of their post. And so I'm going to invite you as the audience, if the first post is number 1, My Reflections on a Movie, and the second title of the post is Family Sacrifices to Ensure Daughter Gets an Education in India. Which of these 2 posts would you be more likely to click on and to respond to? And so we want you to think about what's enough detail without writing an entire paragraph in the title, but just enough specifics to get people interested. The next thing that we want to talk about is the content of posts online. 1 to 2 paragraphs is really a good length. You want to share a unique element of your identity or your community. You want to share your perspective and your voice. So we're not copy and pasting a paragraph from Wikipedia or another website. We are adding our own perspective, including photos and media. And if you do an attachment of photos and media, make sure that you're providing a description for any of those attachments. What is it? How did you create it? How do you relate to it? Is this your favorite food? Is this one of your favorite places to go? Sharing those kind of details. Next, we want to think about asking open-ended questions. So the content discussion here was looking at a video film, and this student posted in India, Roxana's family moved from a rural area in search of jobs, schools, and an opportunity. Instead of asking this question of, do you think this was a positive or negative decision, where someone would answer yes or no, this person specifically asked, what do you think were the positive or negative results of their decision? It invites people to create more of a conversation and to be thinking deeper about what they think about your question. How did you feel when you watched Roxana's story? Students need support in framing these kinds of questions and open-ended questions. Sometimes they'll say, did you think this was good or bad? And the answer is, this is good or bad. So you only have one answer. So you really want to think about how you can do open-ended questions so that you can invite further conversation. Photos and media are certainly something that add a lot of interest to a post online, but what should they post and what shouldn't they not post? And so as we think about this, again, we're thinking about framing these in positive statements instead of negative. We want them to post unique personal insight into their everyday life, adding captions to support understanding or possibly artwork. Please consider permissions. Each school has a different policy, and so think about what the school policies are, but also think about what parents' policies are when you think about the permissions. You want to also try not to use images from Google or Wikipedia. You run into the problem of having copyright for those images. And obviously, graphic or violent images are not acceptable. And so we're thinking about those kinds of things as we're talking about images. But then how do you respond once someone has asked you a question? Well, here's a couple of choices. Number 1, wow, I liked your poem a lot. Or looking at the detail below, you can see how I really like your poem. While I was reading, I realized that both of our poems talk about equality and how it doesn't exist. I really like the fact that you use the love of your family member to describe where you're from. I wonder why some of the staff are working to sabotage such a beautiful city. You want to have a conversation. You want to have a dialogue. And so the first one, while it's a nice affirmation, is not one that's going to invite further conversation. When we think about writing quality responses, here's a good guideline to share with your students. We want to reflect understanding and paraphrase content. And so you're going to say, I like how that made me feel, or this is what I'm hearing you saying. Identify points or details that were valuable. And in the previous one, you can see that is where they said, I realized that both of ours talk about equality. Describe an emotion or an impact that you felt. And that is, this made me think of this made me feel this way, this made me feel uncomfortable is an okay statement as long as it's followed up with the description of why. Pointing out similarities or differences, asking those probing questions to ask more, keep that conversation going. And it is okay to change your opinion if they have made you think about what you've believed before. And it is okay to disagree in a respectful way. Ultimately, you want to talk about quality over quantity. And so it doesn't have to be a really long paragraph, but it's what keeps the conversation going. At iEARN, we have a golden rule, and our golden rule is that you respond to 2 others for every message that you post. And so that way you can think about really keeping conversations going by having that ongoing communication and that consistent thread. You don't have to post every single day, but you do want to think about every time I post something new, how am I responding to others to be respectful and to engage them? We also want to share some video conferencing tips that we have, and I am going to share that in the chat as well right now. And so when you think about your video conferencing tips, as you can see here, most of these are logistics, and you think about planning with your teacher partners. When you plan with your international teacher partners, you want to think about what are their school holidays, what is their school schedule, and set expectations for your students so that they can know when this is going to happen. You want to test your device and connection ahead of time. I was in the sandbox earlier this week on this platform to make sure that we were in play. You also want to log in early. I was on about 10 minutes earlier to make sure that everything would show right on here. If you are not speaking in the exchange, especially in a video conference, it's a good idea to mute your microphone. I don't know if you heard him a minute ago, but my dog decided to say hello to the mailman. And while I'm presenting to you, I didn't have the option of muting my microphone. But if we were in a setting where sometimes you're not presenting, it's a good idea to mute so that you avoid those background noises. You want to position the camera at eye level so that you can look like you're looking at the camera. Sometimes we don't realize that when we position it so the camera's over here, then we're looking far away. And so you want to set it so that it's right in front of you. And again, you need to know your school's policy or guidelines. Some schools allow students to be on camera and some schools do not. So make sure that you have checked that out ahead of time. So, what are the next steps for putting all of this into action? We would like to invite you at iEARN-USA to take a look at our teacher guide. It has much more in-depth detail of preparing to be in a virtual project online. I also would invite you to take a look at our iEARN-USA project book, and it gives you all the different projects that are running this year and lets you know how you can connect. I've given you my personal email, and if you have questions about how this works, please don't hesitate to check in and connect with me and learn more about how you can get involved in our projects. It's time for Q&A. We've got about a minute left, and if there are any burning questions, I would love for you to type them in the chat now. I'm going to move on through the slides as you're answering or putting those questions in the chat. This session has been recorded, so you can find them on the replay tab later today if you want to get some more of these points. We'd like to know what you thought about this session, and this is the link for you to be able to do that. So I'm going to leave that there for just a moment. And last but not least, I would invite you to get involved in the Actionable Innovations Global community. I've been part of that network for probably 5 years before it shifted over to this new name. And it really is a wonderful space to connect with other educators and to connect with people to do virtual projects or virtual exchanges online. If you have any questions, please, again, don't hesitate to reach out to me. And I would look forward to being in touch with you. Also, you can connect with me via the direct messaging envelope at the top of the screen.